but he's asking me authorization.
No, it's fine. I started recording and that's fine.
Okay, good. So Bérengère, well, thank you for coming. So Bérengère Dubrulle is a former student of the École Normale Supérieure, and she defended her thesis, PhD thesis in 1990, that was some time ago, on instabilities, turbulence, and transport in accretion disks under the supervision of Jean-Paul Zahn. So she actually has been postdoc fellow in Tsukuba, Japan, at the Meteorological Research Institute. And she was visiting scientist in Ankara as well, in Bulgaria. So she's been in CNRS, French CNRS, since 1991 and research director since 2000. I think she's presently in CEA Saclay in a joint research group between CNRS and CEA called Sphinx. She's been very active in higher education, outreach, and as she just said, she's now director of the School of Physics of Les Ouches, so congratulations for that. So, well, she has been studying a lot of things. So I have in mind, scale invariance, turbulence, dynamo, statistical mechanics for systems far from equilibrium, climate, and many other things. So I think she will talk now about singularities and irreversibility in turbulence flows, unless you change the title, Bérengère.
No.
And I leave you the floor. It's the same, okay. So okay. I leave you the floor.
Okay, thank you. So let me stop my video because my connection is not so good. And share the screen. Okay.
That's great. You're full screen now.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you very much for this invitation. So today I'm going to talk about irreversibility and singularities. And this is a compilation of a lot of different works that are more or less all around these thematics. And so on these slides, you see all the people that contributed from one way or the other. And among them, several PhD students like Hugues Faller, Denis Cuzet, and also some former postdocs. Okay, so my topic, so why doesn't, okay. It's like this. Okay, so the main topics of these talks will be about turbulence. So I remind you that turbulence is described by this equation, the Navier-Stokes equation, with control parameter Reynolds number. And usually when you have a turbulent flow, what you observe is that there are a lot of vortices. And these vortices, you can see them everywhere in the universe, starting from at very small scale in a superfluid. So here you see quantum vortices in a superfluid, scale 10 to the minus 10 meters. And then a lot of different vortices, tornadoes, vast tube vortex. And then in the end, at very large scale, 10 to the 17 meter, you have galaxies. And of course, there are many vortices at the surface of the ocean, for example, and here you see plenty of them. And here I'm also showing this beautiful picture of vortices in the atmosphere that are shown by the vapor, water vapor. Okay, and of course, if we want to study turbulence, it's not so easy to do it in natural flows, like I have shown, but it's much better to study it in a laboratory. And so all the experiments I will show you in this talk are based on the so-called von Karman flow. So it is a flow that is done in a cylinder that is put into movement by two counter-rotating impellers at the top and at the bottom. and it creates a sort of a bass tube vortex that you see here. This is the mean flow. And what is nice is that now we have access to all components of the velocity in our flow using a system called PIV measurement or even 4D PTV. So what we do is that we put particles inside our flow, glass particle. We shine them with the laser beams at regular intervals, and we take pictures with 4 fast cameras. And so that we have a time resolved measurement of the position of the particle in 3 dimensions. So here you see an example of trajectories of 4,000 particles in a 5 by 5 by 0.5 centimeter volume. And the motion is coded in color. So we have now very good measurement. And the question I want to investigate today is about irreversibility. So irreversibility is in fact based on a broken symmetry of Navier-Stokes equation. So I remind you here Navier-Stokes equation, and I consider the time reversal symmetry, which is the symmetry when t becomes minus t, and if you change t into minus t and u into minus u, you see that the first 3 terms of the equation are unchanged, but the other one reverse. So what you say is that the symmetry, the time reversal symmetry, is a symmetry of Navier-Stokes only if viscosity is equal to 0. So in other words, in the name of a broken symmetry, what you say is that time reversal explicitly breaks, is explicitly broken by the viscosity. And here, let me do a little aside of what I will have in mind, because this is a situation that you have met often during your studies. If I consider the Ising model, so you have a system made of spins with only 2 possibilities, top and bottom, and whose interaction is provided by the following Hamiltonian. So it's an interaction term between 2 spins, and then a kind of forcing provided by a magnetic field B. So you know that in absence of magnetic field, there is a symmetry, the Hamiltonian is symmetric by the symmetry S then minus S. And if you add a magnetic field, then the symmetry is broken, is explicitly broken by the magnetic field. And so if you consider a kind of order parameter of your symmetry, so here is the aimantation, M, which is the sum over all spin. If the symmetry S and minus S holds, then M should be equal to 0. But in the presence of magnetic field, all the spins are aligned, and then M becomes different from 0. And this is what you see here, the pink curves are the curve of magnetization as a function of temperature in the presence of a magnetic field. And you see that the magnetization becomes different from 0. Okay, so this is the analog situation. In our case, the order parameter is not completely easy to find, and usually what people do is that they associate a kind of order parameter to time reversal breaking is the energy dissipation. So it will be our equivalent of the aimantation. And so what we wanted to do is to measure this energy dissipation as a function of Reynolds number. And for this, we use 3 different von Karman experiments. So the one on the left, which is the one we have in Saclay. There is the one in the middle, which is twice as big as the one in Saclay, which is a von Kardam sodium experiment. And then there is the last one, which is a Schreck experiment, which is 4 times larger. And all these experiments are filled with different liquid. So the Saclay experiment, we fill this in either with water or with glycerol. And that way we get Reynolds number from 10 to the 2 to 10 to the 5. In the VKS experiment, sodium, so it was an experiment to observe dynamo, but when we don't observe dynamo, and this happened quite frequently, in fact, in the past year, it was a good occasion to measure just normal turbulence properties. And the advantage is that it has a Reynolds number of 10 to the 7, so we could measure energy dissipation at 10 to the 7. And then the Schreck experiment, using azote or helium at a very small temperature of the order of 2.62 degrees, we are able to reach up to Reynolds up to 10 to the 8. So we had exactly the same setup, different side, different liquid, and we were able to measure very nicely the energy dissipation as a function of Reynolds number. So it is the curve on the right. And on the left, you have a similar curve performed on direct numerical simulation of our setup. And these simulations were performed by Lois Capanera and also by Hugh Faller, who is my PhD student. So it was just to check that we didn't have any problem with the experiment. So if you look on the right, you see different measurements. So the different colors correspond to different mean flow. And so it's different forcing condition if you want. And in all three cases, what you see is that at small Reynolds number, the energy dissipation decays with increasing Reynolds. So this is with decreasing viscosity. And the way it decreases is that the energy dissipation is explicitly proportional to the viscosity, to the parameters that breaks the time symmetry. But after some Reynolds number, you see that the energy dissipation becomes flat, and this is well known in turbulence. This is called turbulence first zero law of turbulence, and it becomes independent of the Reynolds number for all three different way of forcing. You see, it doesn't depend on the forcing. Whatever the forcing we have, after some times, the energy dissipation becomes independent on the viscosity. And so in the language, before I tell you about spontaneous symmetry breaking, you may ask, okay, you've reached a very large Reynolds number. Is this properties also true when there is no viscosity? What is interesting is that in the Schreck experiment that I talked you about, we can be able to explore this regime, because if you consider helium at low temperature and high pressure, if you go at temperature which is above 2.17 degrees, then you have a normal fluid. And this is the fluid we use to compute the point at Reynolds 10 to the 8. But we were also able in the same device to lower the temperature and to go towards the temperature which is smaller than 2.17. And then we went into the superfluid regime where normally the viscosity is exactly equal to 0. And these are the points here that I'm showing you here. The open point, and here also I put them here, but they should be at infinity. And you see that first there is still dissipation, while there is absolutely no viscosity in the flow. And plus, what is remarkable is that this dissipation is exactly the same as in the case where there is viscosity. Okay. So in this regime here, what is very remarkable is that the dissipation you obtain is completely dependent on the viscosity and is even equal to the dissipation you get in a superfluid, in absence of viscosity. So in the language of symmetry, a situation where you have an order parameter which takes a non-zero value even in absence of the symmetry breaking parameter, it is called an anomaly. So in this case, I will speak about dissipation anomaly. And just to remind you what is happening again with the Ising model, and now I consider the Ising model without magnetic field. So the Hamiltonian is just the interaction between spins. And so there is a symmetry S then minus S for the Hamiltonian. And yet, you know that, of course, when you are at a high enough temperature, all the spins are disordered, and so the magnetization is 0. But if you go below a certain critical temperature, then the magnetization becomes non-zero. Even so, there is no magnetic field, nothing to order the spin. So the spins are spontaneously ordered, and it's another case of spontaneous symmetry breaking. So what we'd like to know is to try to understand this kind of transition in turbulence, you know. So in other case, can we see this energy dissipation as a kind of phase transition? But the first obstacle we have in our case is that turbulence is not in equilibrium. So it's a force dissipative system. There is a forcing, there is a dissipation. And so if you look at an energy, global energy budget, like I showed, the time variation of the energy is not equal to 0. It compensates, it is exactly the difference between the power injected on the flow by the forcing and the dissipation by the viscosity, which are so the dissipation is the blue curve, the power injected is the red curve, and the difference in between is the black curve, which is exactly equal to the time variation of the energy. So this is just the first law. And so if you look at the energy is only conserved statistically. That is, on average, it is 0, but there are fluctuations. And we were able to check that the first law is valid. Here you have an example of what we observe in Schreck for different conditions. You see that indeed, the hydraulic measurement, which measures the power, are on average equal to the calorimetric measurement, which measures the energy dissipation by viscosity. So we have statistically an energy variation which is 0, but there are fluctuations. So because of this, we have not an equilibrium system, and we cannot understand the anomaly in a classical statistical framework using our measurement or using numerical simulation of Navier-Stokes. So can we try to understand the anomaly by playing with equation and try to understand it in a classical statistical framework? So first, one question would be, well, if we don't want to be polluted by viscosity, let's remove viscosity, and then the corresponding equation, so the Euler equation, would be statistically symmetric by time reversal. And so we can study this regime and see how the spontaneous bifurcation takes place. So this was done by Marc Brachet and his group, and here is an example of a curve that they obtained, Shikov-Lassetas PRL in 2005. The problem is that if you do that, the system is not in a good equilibrium. Is that if you simulate the truncated Euler equation, so I recall the equation here, and you look at what is going on with time. If you look at the energy spectrum, for example, at a certain time, you see that you have a classical Navier-Stokes looking like energy spectrum until a certain wave number where suddenly the energy spectrum starts to increase like k square. And this k square corresponds to energy equipartition. And if you let time evolve, this energy equipartition spectrum starts to win over. And in the end, the equilibrium state is just energy spectrum going like k square. And so indeed, the system is at equilibrium, but our system does not look like anything like Navier-Stokes. So we cannot use this system to try to understand what is going on in Navier-Stokes. So what we are going to do is something a little bit more clever, in which it's based on an idea by Giovanni Gallavotti in 1996, is to consider a reversible Navier-Stokes equation. So I posted this equation here on the top, and you see that it's essentially Navier-Stokes equation, but with a viscosity which, instead of being fixed, is now prescribed is now time varying, and it is time varying in such a way that energy is exactly conserved. So an easy way to do that is just to put viscosity as a ratio of the power input by the forcing and divided by the entropy of the flow. It's easy to check. So if you do that, then you have an equation that looks like Navier-Stokes, except that viscosity is fluctuating. But it's a real equilibrium equation because the energy is constant over time. So we have a real equilibrium system, and we can try to investigate the time symmetry breaking in this equation and see whether it can tell us anything interesting about Navier-Stokes. So because the viscosity is fluctuating, you cannot use it in defining the control parameter. So we define the equivalent of the Reynolds number, but it's not really a Reynolds number, but then it's just the ratio of the amplitude of the forcing, F0, times the typical scale of the forcing and divided by the energy, which now is fixed and does not fluctuate. So we run many different realizations of this equation with a lot of value of this control parameter. And we observed that essentially we had two regimes. When this control parameter is very small, or let's start when it is large, what we observe is a kind of hydrodynamic phase with a Kolmogorov spectrum, K-5 over a few scales, and then a damping. So it's a kind of overdump system. So it's a sort of equivalent of Navier-Stokes solution with large viscosity. If now you look at small value of this parameter, then you have what we call a warm phase, which is made of a solution which is essentially equipartitioned at small scale, at large wave number, with a little, very small places where you have the spectrums that put a peak like this. Okay, so this is the kind of regime we observe in the Euler system. And in between, there is a transition, and there is what we call RNS turbulence. It's a very interesting regime. So before describing this regime, let me tell you how the transition between the two regimes, the warm phase and the hydrodynamic phase, works. So first on the left, I show you a picture of the entropy, the total entropy in our flow for different value of the parameter R. So I remind you at small value, you have equilibrium case with K square spectrum. And at large value, you have essentially very viscous Kolmogorov region in some sense. So what you see is that at small value of the Reynolds in the equipartition regime, you have very high entropy, but not fluctuating. In the hydrodynamic phase, you have low entropy, but fluctuating. And in between, suddenly, for some value of the parameter, which are around 2.75, what you observe is that you have huge fluctuations of the entropy that develop and that takes the system between the hydrodynamic phase and the warm phase. And to convince you, I have put here on the right the average of the entropy as a function of our control parameter. And you see that we see really a behavior of a phase transition with a critical parameter of 2.75 and a critical exponent of 0.5 because the average of the entropy goes like square root of this parameter. And we even observe some other things about the transition, which remind you of critical transition, like the Ising model, is that if now I look at the amplitude of the fluctuation as a function of the parameter, this is the bottom the bottom picture. Then what you see is that at the critical value of the parameters, there is divergence of the fluctuation. And this divergence is very well described by a mean field model, because the two divergences from both sides are with exponent -1. And moreover, the ratio of the amplitude of the divergence of the positive side is equal to 2 times the amplitude of the negative side. And this is exactly what is the prediction of the mean field model. So basically, in our case, this phase transition that we see is really a mean field, is a phase transition characterized by exponent from mean field theory. Now I'm looking at what is going on just near air critical. What kind of turbulence is it? And what is very interesting is that very near the critical parameter, what we observe is that the turbulence, the state we obtain is exactly equivalent to a turbulent state obtained by running now a real Navier-Stokes equation, which viscosity is equal to the average viscosity in the reversible model. Okay. And to show you here, you have the fluctuation of the entropy on the left. On the blue, they are obtained with the reversible model, so the classical equilibrium model. And on the gray, you see the Navier-Stokes model, so out of equilibrium, but with viscosity exactly equal to the mean viscosity of the reversible model. And you see that fluctuations are comparable of same amplitude. And on the right, you see comparison of the spectra, and at least in the inertial range, they compare very well. And the insert is the transfer of energy, and they also compare very well together. Okay, so it seems that this reversible Navier-Stokes is very nice, because at the transition, we have something which is equivalent to Navier-Stokes. And moreover, you can wonder, but what is creating this phase transition, you know? And in normal mean field theory, or in normal phase transition, it is very frequent that the phase transition are mediated by singularities. So in the Ising model, for example, or all sorts of models, there are singularities in the free energy, or in the kind of a function like this. But in the case of Navier-Stokes, there could be also a kind of singularity, but in the real velocity field. And the way to see that is that I remind you that in Navier-Stokes, the anomalous dissipation means that the energy dissipation is independent on the viscosity. So since the energy dissipation is nu times gradient square, then if this is constant in the limit where nu tends to 0, it is easy to see that the gradient square must diverge in the limit nu tends to 0. So it means that in our flow, there are building of very large gradient or very large entropy. And so maybe it is the signature of a singularity. And in fact, this link between spontaneous symmetry breaking and singularity is not new. It was already made by Larson Sager, the same ones that solved the Ising model. And I think it's not a coincidence that it was precisely Larson Sager that suggested this connection. And in 1949, in a paper that essentially got not understood until the year 2000 or 2006, Larson Sager says that this anomalous symmetry breaking and the constancy of the energy dissipation could be the signature of a dissipation without the aid of viscosity. And to understand how it works, we can use the work of two mathematicians, Raoul Robert and Jean Duchon, who published in 2000 a mathematical argument to essentially explain what Larson Sager was saying in 1949. And if you do a local energy budget in Navier-Stokes equation and take care to do the right computation to allow the velocity field to be singular, so it means that you don't do integration par part. I mean, when the velocity is singular, you lose a lot of things like integration by part, etc. They obtain this local energy budget, which maybe looks familiar to you because you have time variation of the kinetic energy plus the divergence of the flux is equal to dissipation by viscosity, okay? But there is this new additional term that probably you never know, you never met before. And this term is just the limit as L tends to 0 of the gradient of a test function and times the energy increment to the third power. And why you never saw this term before is that in a regular flow, this term is equal to 0. And it's easy to show. That is, if you say that the velocity increment are scale like L to the h in the limit L tends to 0, it is easy to see that d of u is a limit as L tends to 0 of L3 h minus 1. And so if the velocity field is regular, h equal 1, so d of u is a limit as L tends to 0 of L square. And so it tends to 0. So it doesn't exist in a regular flow. So if you make a regular energy budget in a regular flow, you don't have such energy budget. But what is very interesting is that this term can be non-zero if h is less than 1/3, because then it becomes unbounded. You see, it's not bounded anymore by a term that tends to 0. And so, since h equal 1/3 is exactly the Kolmogorov value, this shows that you could have some dissipation by singularities, because if delta u goes like L to the h with h less than 1/3, it is not differentiable, and so it's a singularity. So this shows how singularities can provoke a dissipation that is independent on viscosity. So is it a good explanation in our case? Can these singularities explain the symmetry breaking that we see? So in the simulation or even in our experiment, we cannot measure exactly d of u because it would mean taking L tends to 0 limit, which we cannot do. But what we can do is to explore this term before taking the limit, this term, 1/3 of gradient of phi delta u square. And if you look what it is physically, it's a kind of local energy transfer at a position x and at time t, okay? And so we can have a look at this energy transfer is our reversible Navier-Stokes. And here you have a picture of this energy transfer in 3 situations at a low value of the control parameter, you know, in the phase where we had warm phase with k square at equilibrium. And you observe that at equilibrium, the PDF of this term are perfectly symmetric with respect to the origin. While if you go in the hydrodynamic phase, the PDF is not symmetrical anymore with respect to the origin. And in fact, this is a signature of the time reversal symmetry breaking, because under time reversal, it is easy to show that this energy transfer should go to minus energy transfer. And what is even more remarkable is that in the middle, I show the value of this energy transfer at the critical value of the parameter. And you saw that they are asymmetrical, so the time symmetry is broken. And moreover, they are independent on scale. The different colors code the scale. And you see that at variance with either the left or the right situation, they are independent of scale. So they are scale invariant, which is exactly the kind of behavior that we expect at a phase transition. So indeed, this quantity seems to be a good indicator of both irreversibility and in reversible Navier-Stokes. And in real experiment, I show you also a PDF of this quantity. And so it's not as obvious as in reversible Navier-Stokes, but believe me, here also we see that the time reversal symmetry is broken and the distribution is asymmetric. So if I continue my analogy with the Ising model, at this point, we say, okay, instead of spin, we may have a kind of a system of singularities that may or may not obey the symmetry T of minus T. What we observe is that we have most of the time D different of 0, but maybe we can define a critical temperature, and above this critical temperature, then D could be equal to 0. But the question is that what plays the role of temperature is in our system? Can we find an equivalent? So we have played with all this a lot. We have think a lot about this. And what we discovered is that in our system, there is something we can, there are some things we can change, and it's the level of fluctuation. You know, in temperature, a temperature typically is a level of fluctuation. And there are two ways to change the fluctuation. Either increase the Reynolds number, and you can, in some situation, like in the blue situation, obtain a small increase of fluctuation. But we can also change the forcing, and by changing the forcing, I mean changing the shape of the propeller. And by this, we can really increase the fluctuation or the equivalent of temperature by a factor 10. So to complete the analogy, we try to look at so D as a function of our temperature and see whether it looks like, you know, the Ising curve. And so we observe the curve on the right. And unfortunately, we could not go further. It's difficult to see whether the critical temperature in the Voigt-Karman based on this is equal to 0, or, you know, whether it's something which is close to 0 but below this point here, is that which is the smallest temperature we can get. So here we are. We are a little bit stuck on that about the turbulent temperature. We need more studies. But in the meantime, we can still ask ourselves the question is that can we still describe these singularities and their role? And to describe them, we need to be able to measure them. And what is very nice is that this local energy transfer gives us a way to very easily detect these singularities in our flow. Because we know that this term here is an indicator which should be in the limit L tends to 0 should be equal to 0 if the flow is regular, and non-zero if it is non-zero, we are sure that the flow is not regular. So the idea is that we will be measuring this indicator in our flow and try to do the limit L tend to 0. So we will not go to 0, but we try to decrease the length and see what is happening to this parameter, if it is tending towards 0 or if it stays to a constant value. And just to give you an idea, just to test the idea, you can test it on a situation where the flow has very sharp gradient. Here, for example, it is a solution of Burger's equation with a shock. So you have a very sharp gradient here. And here is the computation of this regularity indicator as a function of scale on the left and as a function of space on the bottom. And you see that blue is where it is 0 and yellow is where it is not equal to 0. And you see that this indicator is blue, so is equal to 0 everywhere, except at x equals 0. And if you decrease the scale, you see that the indicator becomes larger and larger and point towards the singularity. So we applied exactly the same. So it's a good sign that this indicator indeed works and can point to the singularity. So we applied this parameter in our fluid. And here, what we discover is that in our fluid, this indicator can take 0, positive or negative value, so that now the 0 is green and positive is red and blue is negative. But apart from this, you see that we, exactly like for the shock, we see that there are places very localized where the indicator is not 0 when we decrease the scale, and it points towards some special point in the flow. And you know, this is like finding a needle in a hay trash. So what we have been doing is studying the location where this scalar indicator points to us, which are the area where the fluid is less regular. So we have been doing a lot of studies about this, and what we found is that typically every time we were finding places where this indicator was very, very large, we found either near this location, we found a vorticity tube like this, or at some time also vorticity sheets like this, but less and less frequent. We also did a lot of averaging. We also average all the structure we found to try to find the typical event corresponding to this very regular transfer. And to our surprise, what we found is that these typical structure are Burger's vortices. Here you see a vorticity profile along the vorticity tube, and it is very well approximated by Burger's shape, which is exponential. So in blue are the data point, and in white you see the fit. We also looked at the dynamics of the places where these singularities are formed, and what we discovered is that these singularities are formed every time you have interaction of vortices. So here I show you two examples. So on the left, what you see are vorticity field, and I have shown ISO values of large value of vorticities. So in yellow, large values, and in red, even higher values. And in blue, I have put ISO values of large values of the scalar indicator. And maybe you don't see it so much, but you see everything. There is an interaction. You see that there are a lot of indicators in between the two vortices. And you see even better here, where you see where I have added on the top the trajectories of particles in pink. And here you will see interaction of two vortices. And you see that the blue indicator really starts shining at the location of in between the two indicators. Okay, so we have buildings of singularities at the reconnection between vortices. And what is very interesting is that we have again a signature of time symmetry breaking at the appearance of the singularity. Because now if I look at the variation with time of the distance between the two structures that are interacting, it is the little panel that I showed on the left. You see that reconnection time is at 0, and you see that roughly this distance scale with square root of time to reconnection. But you see that they approach much slower than they fall apart. So there is a time symmetry breaking before and after reconnection. And moreover, if I look at this indicator, it can help us to understand what is the scaling of these singularities. Because if you do a very simple argument, you say that these structures are kind of self-similar, using the self-similarity properties of Navier-Stokes equation, then you find that the exponent h, which is characteristic of this kind of event, is h equal -1. So the last question in the 5 minutes left I want to address is, now can we make a model of this singularity interaction? We have done everything we could, we have tried to observe them, but can we do a sort of theoretical model in the spirit of Ising model? And in fact, this is what I'm showing you, is that if you consider this rescaling symmetry for h equal -1, it means that the velocity field obeys this symmetry, and so the singularities, if there exist, are homogeneous solution of Navier-Stokes of degree -1. And in fact, it was shown by Landau that in the axisymmetric case, you can actually find such solution and find their shape. And in fact, later by Serac showed using a theorem that in fact, if you consider simply homogeneous solution of Navier-Stokes of degree -1, the only one you find are these axisymmetric solutions. There are no other solutions. And how do they look like? They are given by function phi, which is x minus gamma scalar x, where gamma gives you the axis of axisymmetry. And gamma is a vector of length less than 1. And the velocity field is given by this shape, which is both simple and complicated. But the velocity field around such singularities, these flows are singular at x equals 0. It has the shape of a pinch. You see the flow lines sort of get near together at the singularity. So in French, a pinch is called a pinson, so we call it pinson in French. And we were able to devise some way of interaction between these pinsons. And here I just show you how we made this pinson interact. So here is an example of interaction of two pinsons. So you see that they get apart and then they repulse each other. And the way we devised this interaction of pinsons was the following. A pinson is a stationary solution of Navier-Stokes equation. So if you add another pinson, it's not a solution of Navier-Stokes. But if you made the position and the axis of symmetry of the pinson vary with time in a way that we prescribed, then the sum of the two pinsons can be solution of Navier-Stokes equation. So this is how we describe the interaction. And what is interesting is that if you look at the law of interaction, then we obtain that they first go together like square root of time and then fall apart more rapidly, exactly like in the interaction of vortices. And if you look at local vorticity, you have something similar to what is observed in experiment or in numerical simulation. So this system of pinsons, I did not have really a lot of time to describe it, but it's a kind of Ising model of symmetry breaking, if you want, in some sense. And so in the future, we plan to play with it to see whether we can have find some fun properties, phase transition, do they collapse, do they make a crystal, things like this. And maybe in the near future, it could even be used to have a two-fluid model of turbulence. The advantage between that with such a system, you can couple Navier-Stokes equation on a regular grid until a Kolmogorov scale, and everything that is below this scale would be described by this pinson. And so you would save a lot of computation time using this two-fluid model. Okay, so I will stop here. And I think it's time for question.
Okay, thank you very much, Bérangère. So we have plenty of time for questions. I think Pat is first in line.
All right, thank you. Thanks for the talk, very interesting. So I have a number of questions, but let me start with one of the broader ones first, since in the good spirit of the statistical physicist, you abuse the Ising model, as we all do.
Of course.
Where emerges then the spin glass? which is a natural, you know, in many problems that one can think of in turbulence and structure formation, have the flavor of the spin glass. And how do you fit it into your house of cards here?
Okay, so for this you need to have a disordered interaction. I don't know, maybe it's in the pinceau. I mean, it was a very naive analogy, as you know. And for example, I did not at all spoke about what is the equivalent of JIG. It's kind of it's a good question. I don't know, actually.
I mean, this becomes very, very relevant to those of us interested in things like layering and so forth in turbulent systems, and in the question of can the layering be irregular and so forth. But anyway, something to think about.
Okay, I have to think about it, yes.
Another one, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Please.
We're not in any hurry, right? And I mean, what kind, could you comment on the what's going on in the interaction, say, of a fluctuation, could even be thermal, with the singularity?
Okay, so in fact, the physics of the singularity is very simple. So the singularity, you see, it is characterized by two things: its position and its spin, its axis of symmetry. Okay, it's a kind of spin. And the way it works is that if you put a regular fluid on the background, what will happen of this pinceau? It will be just advected by the velocity at this point, and it will be sheared by the velocity shear at this point. Okay, so if you have a fluctuation, then just and in return, because these pinceaux are, to maintain them, you need to apply a very, very strong force, because if not, they dissipate. They are very dissipative. In return, these pinceaux, they apply turbulent stress on the background field. Okay, so it's a kind of two-way process. Right. So if you have a thermal fluctuation, then the pinceau will use it to move and to change his axis. And in return, he will suck the thermal fluctuation. And so in the end,
okay, that's precisely like the shear flow meets the instability in our wonderful game of fusion, basically.
Probably.
Exactly. But it begs the question then, can fluctuations pump the singularity? And you seem to be saying is possible.
Yes. Yes, it's possible in this.
So in a sense, you could have thermal pumping of the singularity.
Yes.
Interesting. Yeah. I have one more, but I'll shut up for Edgar and Steve, but then I'll come back for more. You know.
We make a turn first, yes. Steve, I think you're second. Steve Tobias?
Yeah, thanks, Xavier. Thanks, Béranger. It was a very nice talk. I have a very naive question. I couldn't quite follow the scalings in your singularities. Are these Leray singularities or something else?
Yes, they are Leray. Yes, they obey the Leray scaling, exactly.
They do.
Except that I assume, furthermore, that they are not explicitly time dependent. Okay. So if you remove the time dependence, then you find that they are homogeneous solution of degree -1. And then the only one you get are the pinceau, the Landau solution, or the square solution, as Keith told me that Square found it also. These are the only one. It's a mathematical theorem. You cannot find other.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Edgar, I think you're next.
Okay. Thank you, Xavier. Béranger, wonderful talk, really nice. So I have a couple of questions, if I may.
Sure.
The first one is your transition is a second order transition. Is this just an observation, or do you have some theory that would predict that it's a second order transition as opposed to, a hysteretic
No. For the present, it's just observation. And we need, it's a preliminary observation. In fact, there is a PhD student starting and he's trying to investigate more parameters to see if this is robust. And we don't have a theory yet. So okay. We plan to work on that.
Okay. Great. And the second question is, so you say that the formation of these singularities is mediated by the interaction of two vortices.
Yes.
So that reminds me, of the work of Shumel-Rubinstein and simulations by Alain Poumire.
Yes.
And people like that. So can you relate what you have done to the work that they have done? Or is there some connection?
Well, it's a good question. In fact, up to now, nobody really observed really this singularity formation. But when there is interaction of two vortices, what is that there is a kind of bridge that creates in between, and this bridge sort of flattens and then takes a lot of things. And apparently, there is something that is happening when this bridge flattens, and as you know, maybe there is an analytical model of Moffat and Kimura in which they do analytical interaction of 10 vortices using Biot-Savart law, and they observe the formation of the singularity which is created by a cusp in the line of vortices. And in fact, I think this is described by a Schrödinger equation, nonlinear Schrödinger equation also. It's something which has been baked in. So there are models that sort of know, there are several hints that interaction of vortex can lead to something looking like the beginning of a singularity, but there is no proof. And in fact, Alain Poumire, he has shown that the interaction between two vortices automatically damp this kind of instability, and you never observe exactly the singularity. So this is still a problem that is not solved, and we are not sure that there are singularities, but at least there are pre-singularities, something which builds very large gradient and that obey this scaling.
In their work, as I recall, they actually see a cascade of events, right?
Yes.
That lead
yes.
The conjecture is that eventually they will lead to a singularity.
Yes, presumably, yes. So
but you see something analogous to that?
We cannot see that because right now we are just at the Kolmogorov scale. In fact, we are building, I didn't mention it, but we will soon in a month, if everything goes well and COVID is not preventing us again from doing that, we will run a new campaign with a better device. And we will be able to zoom 5 times inside the flow. So we will be able to observe the flow at Kolmogorov scale over 5. Mm-hmm. And maybe we'll see better this cascade of events and things. We hope to be able to observe this. This is very difficult to do. So
I know, but I
don't guarantee.
It's a great problem, and I really enjoyed your talk. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
I think David is the next one. David Hughes.
Hi, Bérenger.
Bonjour, David.
Are there implications from what you're doing, even in terms of numerics? In terms of things are worse than we thought.
Okay. Yes, of course. If they are in fact, in our experiment, even at the Kolmogorov scale, we observe that there are still local energy transfer going towards smaller scale. Okay. So it means that if you do a numerical simulation at Kolmogorov scale and you resolve k eta equal 1, then you lose all these events and your simulation is bad because you lose all the large velocity gradient, etc. This is exactly what P.K. Young also is saying, is that you should go to k max eta equal 8. And it's not clear whether this 8 does not depend on the Reynolds number. So it's catastrophic for numerical simulation because then, you have a numerical curve that is extremely. That's why we are trying to develop this Pinson model, because it would allow us to continue to do our numerical simulation up to Kolmogorov scale. And then everything that is below, we describe it by discrete modes. you know, that are interacted in a Lagrangian way and very simple way. And it could be a possibility, you know, it would be, if it worked, it would be very nice for numerical simulation because then we will not exhaust all computer power.
Yeah. Okay, can I ask another question? If you have a slightly more complicated system, so that, let's say MHD, for example, does that resolve the singularities, or does that just make it, or it has no effect, or it's...
Well, I mean, I'm not expert on MHD. You're probably much better than me, but I think there is the same things with interaction of magnetic lines. I mean, there is also some sort of singularity occurring there. So it will not be exactly the same singularity, but you can have a dissipation due to the reconnection of the magnetic field in the same way as in hydrodynamic. I think Greg Haging did a lot of work on that, and he has many papers on that.
Okay,
so this is also present in MHD, even so it will not be the same kind of singularities. I mean, the scaling might be different, but I'm not, we did not investigate it so far. But we will do it. In fact, we will do it in the next years, because we are actually running now an MHD version of the code I showed you to explore the influence of dynamo. In fact, we want to understand whether the dynamo in VKS is due to this kind of singularities or not. This was our idea. So we are running a numerical simulation and trying to explore this in numerics.
So with a moderate RM but a very high RE, or?
Well, you know, these are numerical simulations, so moderate RM and moderate RE. But what is very nice with these singularities is that they have footprints. You know, even if you have at not too high Reynolds numbers, they leave footprints, and at low Reynolds numbers, there are not real singularities, but some of their properties seems to be, you know, stable, and so you can infer things about very large Reynolds number singularities, even at low Reynolds number. So that's why we are using. So.
Interesting. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I think Guillaume is the next one, hiding behind this strange number GD209.
You've shown that you get a different steady state with should you be force driven, or should you be, for instance, torque driven? Do you have singularities in both, and do they develop in the same manner? And I guess the reverse question is, can you trace back the occurrence of a singularity or not, or the type of singularity, you know, cause or resolvology to the steady state you may access?
Guillaume, this is a very nice question, and in a perfect world, when we will have infinite money and infinite number of people, we would have studied this already. But unfortunately, we didn't have time, or even, you know, enough power to do that. So this is something which is on the list, on a very long list of things to do. And but you know, I think in this you obviously you know well about all our studying in force, and I think that there is something really happening at the location of the blades, and that it might be a kind of singularity that makes the whole flow detach from the blade and you know, makes allow the flow to change its topology, you know, as we've seen in our experiment. And this might also have relevance for planes, because I know of a certain profile of wings in which you see this intermittency of behavior. Sometimes the lift is okay, and sometimes the lift is not okay, and it's connected with formation of boundary layer, you know, at some special place of the wings, and I'm wondering whether it's not connected to singularity. But this is just speculation, and we will just focus on the von Karman. The problem is that on the von Karman we cannot observe this experimentally, because you know, there are blades, and observing velocity at this location is very difficult because the blades are shadowing what is going on. So we can do it only in numerics, and in numerics, these are very difficult numerical simulation to do that at large Reynolds numbers that we don't have access by direct numerical simulation yet. We should investigate Reynolds number of the order of 20,000, and our limit for the present time is 6,000. So we are still far from understanding this. But it's a very good question. Of course, we should do that.
May I have another one?
Yes.
Yes. Well, you showed that it's the interaction of vortices that leads to the development of the singularity. Can it be understood, well, if you make an analogy with, let's say, if you are in a wave-minded spirit, to a collapse of Langmuir waves or self-focusing of vortices, is that a good analogy to what may be occurring below kilowatt scale, or it's a totally different?
Look, I don't know enough about Langmuir wave to be able to tell you. I would say nonsense. So I don't know. It's just something that is known, is that interaction of vortices can lead to quasi-singularities. This is well known. And but the exact model is not. We don't have an exact model right now, an exact analytical model. There is a very good model already of Kimura and Moffat, which you can find in GFM, which for me is pretty convincing. It's a very simple one. It's just based on Biot-Savart, but I don't know. I cannot say more.
Okay. I think Nathanael was next. Nat?
Okay, hello.
Bonjour Nathanael.
Bonjour Bérengère. Thank you for this very interesting talk. My question was about the temperature fluctuations and the analogy between temperature in the Ising model and the turbulence. Yeah. You showed on the slide some things that where you could not find the critical temperature, yes, asking whether it's 0 or not. But I felt while looking at the plot that the transition was in the opposite direction. No, you have at high temperature you had dissipation, and at low temperature.
Yeah. It was reversed. Yes.
So why is that?
It's like this. You know, in 2D, the vortices have negative temperature. So I don't know. It's just an observation. Okay. I don't have any explanation right now.
So it's not so surprising to have.
Yes, it's not completely analogizing to the Ising. I mean, I showed the Ising because everybody is used to Ising and it makes a mental, but of course it's the opposite. It's the opposite direction. I agree with you.
Okay.
Probably because when fluctuations are not high enough, singularities cannot form. I mean, maybe this was related to the comment of I don't remember Pat or. If you need fluctuation to build singularities, then you know, when they decrease, you have no singularities, and so you have no dissipation. It could be as simple as this.
And I have a quick other question about the concept of singularity. So if I understand correctly, it means that you never go to a scale where viscosity is important, but you dissipate anyway.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, good. I think Norman is next. Norman?
Oh, yeah. Hi. Yeah, thank you for the interesting talk. I had two quick questions. First was, so you mentioned the Onsager conjecture and do the Pinsons that you're studying, does the scaling or the singularity have any relation to the critical sort of, H in the Onsager conjecture? And then second kind of related question is there maybe, is there an argument as to why the Pinsons specifically are selected as the singularity that show up in the flow as opposed to, like vortex sheets or other, vortex cusps or things like that?
Okay, so regarding the scaling, there are two important things to determine the energy dissipation. There is a scaling of D, but then you need to multiply by the probability of finding the scaling exponent, right? Because if the probability is very low, even if you have very high dissipation, on the average, it will average to 0. And so, if you say that the dissipation of von Sager is created by singularities corresponding to h equal 1/3, then you can show that this is enough to create the dissipation if the singularities are evenly distributing, and there is some argument with the codimension of the place where the structure are indicated. And so for the singularity f, h equal -1 to contribute to the dissipation, you can show that they should be distributed on a space of codimension equal to 4, which is quite big. I mean, it means that it's a very small set because they are very large. You know, they contribute to very big dissipation. So you can have a very sparse set, and it would be enough to explain the average dissipation. And regarding the second, I forgot the second. The second is that the pinson, the little singularities we are using is just a model. I mean, it's like Ising model. We don't claim that they describe exactly what is going on in the fluid. It's just we want to build a model that we can play with, doing some simple simulation to try to understand something on the real singularities if they exist of Navier-Stokes. So I don't claim that that their shape correspond exactly to what we see. It's just like the Ising model. You know, the Ising model is used to understand the behavior of ferromagnetic material, but no ferromagnetic material is done with the spin up and down. You know, it's much more complicated, but the Ising model helps understand it. So that's our pinson model is exactly the same spirit.
Thank you.
Osgo?
Hi. So can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, my question is, when you're generating this time irreversibility, let's say, without dissipation, what happens to intermittency in this case?
Very good question. I cannot tell you because we did not investigate it yet, and it's we plan to do it for the PhD thesis that is starting this summer. So I can tell you in 3 years.
Okay, good.
Okay. Before Pat strikes again, I will ask a small one. In this dissipation function, the D of U, there is a regularizing function of test function phi, which then was related to another function G. And the structure or the expression of this G function was not that obvious to me. So I have 2 questions, in fact. How did you arrive there? And then how much is it dependent, or is it sensitive to the choice of this?
No. So all I've said is insensitive to the choice of this function. This function has to have some good properties. It must be C infinity of unit integral. It must be compact normally, but in analyzing our data, we use Gaussian. But you can show that in the limit L tend to 0, this function is completely irrelevant. So of course, in all the things that I have shown you, they depend on this function, that the intensity of D will change. But if I was going in the limit L tend to 0, everything would be independent on this function.
I see. Interesting. Pat, I think we have done a full circle now.
Yeah, exactly. We have one phase cycle. So back to the question of intermittency. I mean, this ensemble of strong entropy fluctuations that you have in the intermediate regime between the thermal and the normal state. If one were to, in some sense, pass through by external control somehow from one state to the other, what would the relation between the intermittency in the normal state be to the strong entropy fluctuations? Would it be in some sense, could it be construed as a fossil state of the other, or is there no relation whatsoever?
Well, Pat, I have no idea. You are asking me to foretell what we will be observing in numerical simulation.
Another one.
And I'm recorded, so there is no way I'm going to make a prediction that could be wrong. So it's a very good question, and it's very interesting. In fact, it was also our motivation to study this reversible system, is to say whether we could say things about intermittency and singularity. Normally, there is a connection between intermittency and singularity. So okay, I'm doing this prediction off the record to stop recording. My prediction would be that in the equilibrium phase, there would be no intermittency because everything is reversible, everything is very nice. And the intermittency would be due to the onset of these singularities. But about this fossil state, I don't know. So it's an interesting question. I see why you are telling it, but I don't
know. Okay, maybe I will have another one. You know, if playing with dimensionality as was done with renormalization will help there or not at all?
I did not hear you very well.
If you would play with a fictional problem with another dimensionality form.
Okay, no, I think it will not work at all. It will not work because there is a singularity. The problem is that I'm not sure the renormalization groups works in case of singularity. I mean, I'm not an expert, so I don't know, but I don't know. Interesting question. In fact, it's some of the questions that can be addressed with this little, with this little model, in fact. Exactly. Yeah, in fact, the question is, do we see, I mean, if I can tell you, when you apply the renormalization group to Navier-Stokes equation, maybe there is not one fixed point, but there are two fixed points, one corresponding to h equal 1/3 and one corresponding to these singularities. And intermittency is just the signature of the system going from time to time around h equal 1 minus third, and from time to time equal h equal -1. And intermittency will be just this, This could be a possibility.
Interesting. I don't see any other question. Osgur, you still have your hand raised, but I think you're done, right?
No, I just forgot. Yeah, sorry.
Okay. So I think we'll...
I have maybe a last one.
Nathanael has another question.
Yes.
I think I'm a bit confused. Probably I missed something when you described it. You mentioned the Burger solution, and just after that, in my mind, it went to the Pinson. So what's the link between the two? Again, sorry.
So there is no link. Shocks are a singularity with exponent h equals 0, and there is a singularity of Burger's equation, and Pinson are singularities of Navier-Stokes with h equal -1.
No, not Burger's equation, Burger vortex.
Burger vortex. No, what I was saying is that what we observe is that the singularity would always happen near a Burger's vortex. And then I showed you some dynamics, and what is happening, in fact, it does not happen near a Burger vortex. It happens near two interacting Burger's vortex.
Okay. And this makes the Pinson. The interacting of two Burger vortex makes the Pinson. Okay.
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I think there's no No more questions. I don't see anyone there. So I think we'll thank you warmly, Bérangère, for this talk and answering all the questions. And I think we are done. So thank you. Thank you again for all of you.
Thank you, and goodbye, everybody.
And goodbye.
Hope to see you soon in real.